Welcome everybody. Thanks for hosting us again. Second time in my Maddie doing this, and it's quite exciting seeing that there's still people keen to listen to the message after my first shot at it. It's just like, okay, cool, this is good. So I'm Solomon Kilson. I've been running the South Island Independence Movement page for coming up 10 years now. How all this kind of came about is my family moved out to Burke's Pass when I was a kid, grew up out there, and whenever there's a get-together or a community barbecue, there's always somebody talking about the South Island, cutting the cable and letting the the North swim away. But we never should have rung that fish up in the first place. It's because it's nothing but trouble. I grew up hearing all these stories, and it's always your Uncle Joe who's had a few too many beers, but it was a constant. It was always a conversation. Whenever Auckland or Wellington did something, or whenever Auckland was raising funds to pay for some obscure project that half of them cost tens of millions of dollars, and consultant fees, and then never even get done, every time this happened, somebody had something to say about cutting the cable in the South. Should just go its own way and do its own thing. So as I got older, and I started, getting 16, 17, 18, starting to be at voting age, I started looking. I'm just like, I've heard of the South Island Independence Movement, I've heard of these ideas, I've read a couple of obscure websites talking about it. Where is everybody? And I couldn't find anybody. So I figured, well, I'm looking. If I'm looking, there's probably somebody else who's also looking. So I set up a Facebook page, I set up a Facebook group, and it started off with 2, 3, 10, 20 people. We started sharing news articles and memes and poking fun at the North Island whenever they did something silly. And then a year down the track, I looked at the page and there's 900 people following the page, and I'm like, that's kind of cool. And then we hit 1,000 people following the page. And then I think it was 7 Sharp picked us up and they came down and they wanted to talk to me about the Rebel vs South. And I'm this young guy leading the charge, and I'm like, here we go. And then after that aired, it went from 1,000 followers on the Facebook page to 9,000, then 10,000, then 11,000. And then COVID rolled around. Ironically, COVID in 2020. In 2019, I started compiling the book that you guys have seen out there, Our Southern Isle. And what I did was I went and found all the pieces of information about the South Island Independence Movement, the idea, the theory, the concept, and I couldn't find any of the breakdowns, any of the math on how any of this works. So I went region by region and calculated it all. I found all the numbers, and I'm like, hold on. At no point in time that I can find has the North Island government spent more money in the South than the South has constantly spent up north. What that means is we're tax positive, and we generally, except for a couple of odd bits out, we've always been tax positive. That includes the likes of the earthquakes, and when all that happened, even there, when you look at the grand spectrum of it all, the South has still paid more tax than the government has ever spent in the South Island. I'm like, that's not on. So I compiled all this book, I published it in 2020, and then COVID and the COVID lockdowns hit. Suddenly the South Island Independence Movement Facebook page jumped from about 14, 15, 16,000 people to we're now at 39,000 people following the Facebook page. That's followers than a number of the establishment legacy political parties. Now those are just likes on Facebook, it doesn't mean anything, but that's still a lot of people, and the fact that I'm just, some young guy based in Timaru, some small business owner, running a Facebook page and an apolitical political movement, we have amassed more eyeballs and more people paying attention than some of these legacy parties, and it's just like, okay, cool, something's starting to happen. And with all the lockdowns, and the South Island was COVID free for over a year, and we still had all the lockdowns, and it just didn't make sense, and then things started to ramp up. And then about 6 months ago, I'm like, right, I've got a bit more time freedom. I'm actually going to put some serious effort into this, and I'm going to start doing meetings around the island. And it has been quite the whirlwind since then. So, the way China and the UN and all this other carry-on is they want New Zealand. It's now like, there's New Zealand up north, and they seem quite happy with it. I've actually spoken to a few people in Northland, and they're like, so when you guys split off, can we split off and we'll have a trade deal with you because we don't like what those guys are doing. So that's been a bit of a fun conversation. And there's a lot of people that put up a lot of ideas on names for the South Island. I'll touch a bit more on that later. But there's Mainland here. There's the Maori name that I can't pronounce it. I always trip up on it. But yeah, that's a bit of stick to China's satellite state up north. Getting on to the nitty gritty of it all. This is where the rubber meets the road. It's the fact of we have massive coal reserves, massive gold reserves, massive oil, gas, the whole 9 yards, and it's literally sitting there. I've done a couple of meetings over on the West Coast, and I've talked to a few lads out there, and the West Coasters are probably the nicest, friendliest, most hospitable, angriest people I've ever met in the country. I remember going down the main highway over there, and I went around this corner, around this hill, and there's raw coal falling out of the hill onto the roadway. Now, you see an opportunity, you come and take it. There's premium West Coast coal falling out onto the main highway. If you pull over, you pick out, grab a shovel or a pickaxe and you start loading into the back of your van, you get fined for that. It's an instant fine. It's literally falling out of the hill onto the road. And that story is all too common. There was one chap I spoke to, and again, I don't know if it's a big fish or a big fish tail, but he talked about how he's worked in and out of the gold industry for a while, and he said that they did an aerial survey and with their machines or whatever, they did a scan of the West Coast. And he says that in that scan, they, not just in the rivers, but in the bush itself, there's still nuggets of gold the size of your fist. However, if you walk onto that dockland and you pick that gold up, instant $50,000 fine, and the gold's not yours anymore. And it's just sitting there. And it's all there waiting to be picked up. And it's not just the West Coast. Otago has huge gold reserves as well as plenty of others. And I understand from a lady from the last time we were here that she was working with surveys of oil and gas. And apparently there's, the Great Southern Oil Basin out there, all that oil and gas. Apparently there's a fissure that comes inland up past Waimate that we don't even have to get our feet wet, and you could, stick a rod down there and there's oil and gas. New Zealand, the South Island's oil and gas is some of the cleanest, highest octane, cleanest burning in the world. From what I understand, of such high quality, you can't use it to run a car, it's jet fuel. Like, it's that potency and it's that clean, but we're not allowed to touch it because, we're clean, green New Zealand, and, we're going to save the world from, environmental disaster with our nothing population versus the rest of the world, but carry on.
It's owned by someone else, that's why. Years ago. I
mean, somebody might call it a Ponzi scheme or a scam, but I wouldn't know anything about that, the way the world goes. Now, this is the old call to for me in the South Island, cut to cable. We have the power. We are 23% of the population, yet we supply 41.5% of the country's power needs. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a news article a few years back where some sheep or something had chewed on a cable and severed the power connection from North to South Island, and Auckland went dark, and apparently there was 3 hours of people just crying in the corner because their cell phones weren't working with no reception because they had no power. The North Island doesn't pay for that power. It's New Zealand's power. The dams are ours, we maintain the dams, they're on our land, we do all the work. If you were to charge the North Island for what they have used over the last, I think, I calculated about 25 or since the 60s, that's how much they should have paid into the southern economy over that period of time. It's a lot. Now, one of the things you'll see over here is the blue versus red. The South Island's falling over, the South Island's not covering its own power. It's not how it works. What you see there is power we send up, they don't use it all, and they send it back. The South Island has always got power. We're not short on power. So those are what the red lines are, where the power comes back down the cable. So that's north to south, south to north. As far as who pays for the country, how many of you are familiar with the Pareto distribution? 30% of the population produces 70% of the value. If you've worked on a job site, you always know there's 3 buggers who work really bloody hard, and there's 7 guys who are doing something and nobody's quite sure what. It's that whole distribution where small amount of hard-working people cover the weight. And this is what we're seeing in the South Island. And now we're 23% of the population. We produced about 22% of the country's GDP. Keeping in mind that that 23% of the population includes elderly, sick children included. So the fact that we're covering over and above. What you're also seeing here is, now this is one of the things about the GDP. GDP, they tell us about GDP, the country's GDP here, the GDP here. GDP is a bit like BMI. Me and an All Black have the same BMI. He's pure muscle, I'm pure no. That's the same when it comes to GDP. How they calculate GDP is, if I've got $5 and I hand you that $5, I let that go, cool, that's $5 GDP. You decide you don't want the $5, you hand it back to me, we just created $10 GDP. That's how GDP is calculated. It is total amount of money transferred from one person to another. Doesn't actually mean anything. So we grow a league of land in the south, or we grow some pine, or we export something, coal, gold, whatever. That's in GDP terms the same value as 100,000 people trading a coffee and wiping windows in Auckland and downtown Wellington. It doesn't balance. And this is as far as trade deficit, this is where the North Island's trade deficit is at. So in total, North Island's trade deficit, they import more than they export in value. South Island's trade surplus. South Island produces wealth, the North Island spends it. But it's okay, us Southerners are just griping. We just need to be quiet and do as we're told and keep powering the machine and keep it going. Cost of being attached to the North Island. There is a cost to this. They say if the South Island surely couldn't survive without the North Island. If the North Island disappeared tomorrow, every working person out there would get a tax cut. The vast majority of homeless live in the North Island. The vast majority of prison inmates are in the North Island. Not all down here. There is a cost to this, and all the people that come in from overseas that don't adjust to New Zealand, where are they all based? You go to Auckland. Auckland's a very different place to what it was 10, 15 years ago. As far as values go, North Island's a bit smaller than the South. They've nearly got 4 million, they've got coming up 4 million, we've only got just over 1 million. But GDP per capita, Southerners work harder for their money and they earn more money. This is, the revolving door. Now, the one thing I do find interesting is the North Islanders versus South Islanders behind on their debt. More North Islanders, more northern families are getting behind on their debt versus ours. Ours is quite stable. Theirs is going down the gurgler. If you know anything about, working out on the ocean, if something heavy is in the ocean and then it suddenly drops, what does it take with it? Everything around it. I'm not sure if I want to be attached to that anchor. And then you've got the difference in average house prices, crime. You look at the crime difference. Per 10,000 per month, per 10,000 people, nearly 53 crimes per 10,000 people, versus the South Island, about 14 per 10,000 people per month. So it's safer, it's cheaper, we work harder. Doesn't really seem like it's balancing. Oil. These are all petroleum wells. This is old information. This information's been out a long time. They talk about, how could the South Island sustain itself? Why are the petrol prices so high? Why have we shut down Marsden Point? There's a lot of things going on, and it's one of those things where if the South Island managed to set up a refinery down here, we shouldn't be struggling with power prices.
Someone else owns all that. How do you get around that?
A lot of these cases, so if you're a landowner and there's a $1 billion a year potential on your land and they're offering you some royalties, most landowners would be quite happy to develop that. The other thing as well is a lot of these areas are also dock land. They're all public land and the government doesn't really like the common people sitting on top of gold mines. So they tend to, you look at the West Coast, what is that, 85% of the West Coast is now dockland, because they keep pushing farmers out, pushing people out, they don't like people going there.